When Jordan Miller, a struggling black single mother from Charleston, inherits an old yacht from a grandfather she never knew, she expects nothing but another burden. What she finds instead hidden, deep within the corroded hull of the Maria Dawn, is a cache of gold bars stamped with the seal of the Nicaraguan National Bank. As Jordan digs deeper, she uncovers a web of lies stretching back to the Cold War. Missing national reserves, covert U.S. operations, and the shadow of a man who vanished decades ago. Pursued by those who will kill to keep the truth buried, Jordan must team up with investigative journalist Camille Brooks to expose a conspiracy older and darker than she ever imagined. From the salt-stained docks of Key West to the glittering halls of political power, the Maria Dawn is a story about legacy, courage, and the cost of truth. It's a journey of a woman who inherits not just a boat, but the unfinished fight of a generation, and learns that some treasures are measured not in gold, but in justice. The rain had already turned the narrow street outside Jordan Miller's apartment into a shallow river by the time she closed the door behind her and leaned her back against it, letting the weight of the day slide off her shoulders. The smell of fried shrimp and bleach still clung to her uniform. Her feet ached from 12 hours on shift at the diner. Her palms smelled faintly of soap and metal coins. And the only sound inside the one-bedroom apartment was the hum of the old refrigerator and the faint squeak of cartoon voices coming from her son's tablet in the next room. The place was small, too small, but it was theirs. The walls, painted a dull cream, were marked with crayon ghosts from Elijah's earlier years. A single ceiling fan turned lazily above her head, whining with every revolution. She exhaled, a slow, tired sound, and rubbed her wrists, trying to remember when she had last taken a day off. She walked to the kitchen table, a wobbly hand-me-down covered with grocery receipts, and dropped her tip jar onto it. The coins rolled toward the edge before she caught them in her palm. $57 and some change. Not terrible, not great. The rent was due in 5 days. The electricity bill was pink, and Elijah's sneakers had holes near the toes. She made a mental list. Pay rent first, skip the cable, hope the old Honda survived another week. That had become her rhythm, always hoping something would hold together long enough for her to catch up. "Mom?" Elijah's voice came from the bedroom doorway. His hair was a tangle of curls, his eyes heavy but bright. "You said we could read before bed." "I did, baby," she said, forcing a smile. She always smiled for him, no matter how tired. "Give me 5 minutes. I just need to wash up." He nodded and disappeared back into the room. She loved that boy fiercely, loved the way he still trusted her completely, as if she could stop the world from falling apart with a single word. She washed her hands at the sink, staring through the cracked kitchen window at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. 32 years old, but she looked older tonight. The deep brown of her skin gleamed dully in the weak light. Her eyes, once quick and ambitious, now looked careful. That was what life in Charleston had done, taught her caution before hope. When the phone rang, it startled her so much she dropped the dish towel. The number was unfamiliar, the area code Miami. For a moment she almost ignored it, assuming another collection agency or scam caller. But something about the clean, professional tone of the number made her swipe to answer. "Hello? Miss Jordan Miller?" The voice was smooth, male, and crisp with Southern formality. "My name is Robert Whitaker. I'm an attorney with Whitaker & Lowe out of Miami. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Her pulse spiked. Lawyers never meant good news. "I'm fine," she said slowly. "What's this about?" "I'm calling regarding the estate of Mr. James W. Miller. You're listed as the sole surviving heir." "I think you've got the wrong Miller," she said, already moving toward the counter where she kept a pad of paper. "I don't know any James Miller." "I believe he was your grandfather, ma'am," the man continued, undeterred. "He passed away last month in the Florida Keys." The words hit like a cold slap. Her father had died when she was 7, a truck accident on the I-95, and her mother never spoke about his side of the family. Jordan had grown up believing that part of her bloodline was lost, or maybe just uninterested. "I'm sorry," she said, struggling to sound polite, "but my father never mentioned a father of his own. Are you sure this is correct?" "There's no mistake," Whitaker said. "Mr. Miller left clear instructions regarding his property. specifically a yacht named the Mariah Dawn, currently moored in a marina near Key West. According to his will, the vessel and its contents are now yours. Jordan stared at the stack of bills on her counter, half expecting the attorney to start laughing. A yacht? That's correct. The Mariah Dawn, 44 feet, built in 1965. The dock fees are paid through the end of the month. I can email the documents for transfer. She blinked. I don't understand why he'd leave anything to me. I never met the man. I'm not privy to his personal reasons, Miss Miller, but his instructions were explicit. I suggest you visit soon. The marina's been maintaining the vessel, but not for much longer. After he hung up, Jordan stood motionless, phone still in hand, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. She looked at the bills again, the tired curtains, the cheap plastic clock ticking above the sink. A yacht. She could barely afford to keep her rusted Honda on the road, and now she supposedly owned a yacht. Mom, Elijah called again. She went to his room and sat beside him on the bed, where the covers smelled faintly of laundry powder and crayons. Hey, big guy, guess what? We might have to take a little trip this weekend. To where? Florida, the Keys. His eyes widened. Like the ocean? Exactly. Why? She smiled despite herself. Because apparently someone left us a boat. A real one? So they say. He bounced on the bed, grinning. Can we go see it? She hesitated, looking at his excitement. Yeah, baby. We'll go see it. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep, she sat alone at the table, staring at the email from Whitaker and Lowe. The attached PDF glowed on the screen, full of legal language she barely understood. Yacht registration number 04165MD. Deceased owner James W. Miller. Next of kin Jordan Miller. Everything looked official. There was even a faded black and white photo of the vessel, a long, elegant hull, white paint weathered by years of salt and sun. The name the Mariah Dawn curved along the stern in neat lettering. Outside, thunder rolled across the rooftops, shaking the window glass. Jordan closed her eyes, listening to it. Somewhere far to the south, on a stretch of forgotten coastline, a boat with her name on it was waiting. The next morning brought no answers, only bills. Her manager at the diner scowled when she asked for a weekend off. Short notice, he muttered, tapping the schedule. You sure this isn't just another family drama? I wouldn't call it that, she said. It's more like unfinished business. He sighed. Fine, but if you're not back by Monday, I'll have to fill your shifts. By Friday evening, she and Elijah were on the road. The old Honda rattled like a coffee can full of bolts, but it kept moving. The sun dropped behind the Spanish moss, and the flat horizon of South Georgia, as they drove south, the highway a ribbon of orange and violet. Elijah sang quietly in the back seat until he fell asleep, his head against the window. Jordan kept her eyes on the road. Her mind raced between fear and curiosity. If the lawyer was wrong, she'd lose nothing but gas money. But if he was right, she pictured a gleaming yacht, maybe something she could sell for enough to wipe out her debts, buy a little breathing room. Hope, she learned, was dangerous, but tonight it felt like the only fuel she had. The next day the landscape changed. The road stretched thin across the blue water of the Keys, pelicans skimming low over the waves. Salt hung in the air, coating her lips. Elijah woke up just in time to see the first fishing boats gliding through the shallows. Is that ours? He asked, pointing at a sleek white yacht cutting across the sunlight. I doubt it, she said with a small laugh. Ours is probably the one held together with duct tape. By late afternoon, they reached the marina Whitaker had described. It was smaller than she expected. Half the slips were empty, the rest filled with boats in various states of disrepair. Faded names like Seabell, Destiny 2, and Faithless were painted on their sterns. The office was a weathered shack with peeling paint and a crooked sign that read Pelican Bay Marina. Inside, the air smelled of cigarette smoke and salt. A man in his 60s sat behind the counter, flipping through a dog-eared magazine. His skin was leathered from sun, his hands covered in grease. When he looked up, his eyes narrowed. Help you? I'm here about slip 31, Jordan said, handing him the papers. The Mariah Dawn. Something flickered in his face. surprise, maybe unease. "You're Miller's granddaughter?" "That's what they tell me." He studied her for a long moment before standing. "Come on, I'll show you." They walked down the dock, passing gleaming motorboats and rusting hulls, the boards creaking beneath their steps. The smell of algae and diesel grew stronger the farther they went. At the very end of the pier, the man stopped and gestured. "There she is." Jordan stared. The Maria Dawn wasn't gleaming. She was huge and tired. Her white paint flaked away to reveal streaks of dull metal. Rust dripped down her sides like old blood. The wooden deck was warped and gray. One window had been replaced with plywood. And yet, under the ruin, there was beauty. The lines of the hull were graceful, built for distance, not show. The name on the stern was barely visible, but still there, curling like a whisper. Maria Dawn. "She's seen better days," the man said. Jordan felt Elijah's hand slip into hers. "She's scary," he whispered. The man cleared his throat. "Your granddad lived on this boat the last few years. Quiet fella. Died right there in his bunk. Natural causes, they said." Jordan turned to him. "You knew him?" He nodded. "A little. He didn't talk much, but he loved this boat. Turned down offers from collectors. Said she was worth more than they'd ever guess." "What did he mean by that?" The man shrugged, already turning away. "Beats me. Just, if you're thinking of selling her, don't do it too quick. Some things take time to understand." He handed her a set of keys, the metal cold in her palm. Jordan looked back at the yacht, the afternoon light breaking against her rusted hull. "Thank you," she said softly. When they reached the gangplank, Elijah hesitated. "Do we have to go inside?" "Just a look," she said, tightening her grip on his hand. "We need to see what we're dealing with." The plank groaned under their weight as they crossed. The deck felt spongy in spots, and the smell hit them instantly: salt, mildew, and something older, like wet paper and metal. The main cabin door was swollen shut. Jordan pushed once, twice, then threw her shoulder into it. It burst open with a squeal that echoed across the empty marina. Inside, light filtered through dirty windows, revealing a chaos of objects. Maps pinned to walls, books stacked on the floor, a half-disassembled radio, yellowed charts with red pencil lines cutting across the Caribbean. It didn't look abandoned. It looked lived in, as if the owner had stepped out only yesterday. Elijah's fear turned to fascination. "It's like a pirate ship," he said, running his fingers over the edge of a brass compass. Jordan picked up a notebook from the table. The pages were damp, the handwriting neat and looping. Dates, coordinates, weather notes, short comments in both English and Spanish. Some pages were stuck together, others torn out entirely. A shiver crawled down her spine. Whoever her grandfather had been, he hadn't spent his final years drifting. He had been working on something meticulous. In the forward cabin, they found a small bed neatly made, a wool blanket folded tight. On the nightstand sat a candle burned to a stub, a rosary, and an old black and white photograph. Jordan lifted it carefully. A young man in naval uniform stood beside a woman holding a baby. The woman's smile was wide, the man's hand protective on her shoulder. Her throat tightened. She recognized the man instantly. His face was her father's, only younger, which meant the baby could only be. "That's Grandma?" Elijah asked, peering over her shoulder. "I think so," she whispered. "And that's your grandpa, when he was little." She sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at the photograph, feeling the years collapse in on themselves. Her family, once a blur of disconnected stories, suddenly felt real and close. They explored the rest of the yacht until the sun began to set, the sky bleeding pink and gold through the cracked windows. Every corner revealed more questions. Why had her grandfather filled the cabin with maps? Why were the logs written in 2 languages? And what had he meant when he told the harbor master the boat was worth more than anyone knew? As she locked the cabin and led Elijah back down the dock, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. She glanced over her shoulder and saw a man on a nearby yacht, pretending to adjust a line while his eyes followed her. Paranoia, she told herself. Just paranoia. But that night, in the dim motel room, long after Elijah had fallen asleep beside her, Jordan sat at the small desk with her laptop open, searching the name James W. Miller and the yacht Mariah Dawn. The internet gave her almost nothing, no social records, no obituary, just a single mention in an old marina registry. But when she searched the yacht's make and year, she found more. The Mariah Dawn had been built in 1965 by a shipyard known for custom work vessels designed for long voyages and, occasionally, for clients who valued discretion over luxury. Smugglers, intelligence contractors. She leaned back in the creaking chair, staring at the faded photo on the screen. What had her grandfather been doing with a ship like that? She thought of the harbor master's words again. Worth more than they'd ever guess. Outside, the rain started again, soft against the window. Elijah stirred in his sleep, murmuring something she couldn't make out. Jordan closed the laptop and stared into the dark. The Mariah Dawn was hers now, for better or worse. And for the first time in years, her life was tilting towards something she couldn't predict. A mystery, an inheritance, and a promise buried somewhere in the bones of that ghostly yacht, waiting for her at the edge of the sea. Morning crept into the motel through a haze of gray light and the distant sound of waves brushing against the docks. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the air heavy and clean, filled with the briny smell of salt and wet wood. Jordan woke to the soft rustle of Elijah turning over beside her. For a moment she forgot where she was. The thin floral curtains and the clatter of seagulls outside did not belong to their Charleston apartment. Then the memory of the previous day returned in a slow, steady rush. The lawyer's voice, the drive south, the rusted yacht waiting like a ghost at the end of the dock. She sat up slowly, listening to the uneven hum of the motel air conditioner. Her back ached from sleeping on the stiff mattress, but the ache was distant, like an echo. She glanced at her son. He slept peacefully, one arm wrapped around his stuffed dolphin, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the faint rumble of the ocean. A mix of pride and guilt washed over her. Pride that he could still sleep so deeply, guilt that she might be dragging him into something she didn't understand. After a quick breakfast of stale vending machine muffins and motel coffee, they drove back toward the marina. The sun had burned off most of the fog, and the water shimmered in soft blues and greens. The Pelican Bay Marina looked slightly less desolate in daylight, though the same tired boats leaned against their moorings like old men waiting for something that would never come. The air smelled of diesel and decay, but also of promise of salt and possibility. Elijah was quiet as they walked along the dock. His small hand gripped hers tightly, his eyes darting toward every shadow that moved. When they reached the Mariah Dawn, Jordan paused, taking in the sight of the yacht under the morning sun. It was worse than she'd remembered. The white hull was streaked green with algae, the brass railings dull and pitted, but now in full light, she could see what the harbor master had meant. There was beauty buried under the ruin-fine craftsmanship in the curve of the bow, careful design in the way the decks layered upon one another. Someone had once cared deeply for this boat. Jordan climbed aboard first, testing each plank of the gangway with her weight. The boards creaked but held. She reached back for Elijah's hand and guided him up. The deck was slick with moisture, so she moved slowly, her shoes squeaking against the warped boards. The cabin door opened easier this time, and the smell that greeted them, mildew, sea salt, and the faint metallic scent of old machinery, was almost comforting. The interior looked just as chaotic as before. Papers lay in uneven stacks across the chart table. A brass sextant sat on the counter beside an empty whiskey bottle. On one wall hung a faded map of Central America, dotted with thumbtacks connected by red string. Jordan traced one of the strings with her eyes. It began near the coast of Nicaragua and stretched out toward the Florida Keys. Elijah wandered toward the galley, peering at the strange old equipment. "Did Grandpa live here all the time?" he asked. "I guess he did," Jordan said softly. She crouched to open one of the lower drawers. Inside were carefully arranged tools, screwdrivers, bolts, and wrenches, each wrapped in a rag and labeled in neat handwriting. Her grandfather might have been a mystery, but he hadn't been careless. "He took care of his things," she murmured. On the counter beside the sink sat another logbook, this one newer than the one she'd found before. The cover was stiff with salt residue. She flipped it open, careful not to tear the pages. The entries began 6 years ago, written in steady block letters. Each one was marked with coordinates, dates, and cryptic notes. South current stronger than expected. Contact missed at Puerto Cabezas. Cargo safe. The word cargo appeared again and again. She frowned, reading further. Some pages were written in Spanish words she only half understood from high school lessons. El oro está seguro. Nadie debe saber. The gold is safe. No one must know. Jordan's heart skipped. She turned another page and another, but the entries ended abruptly 2 years ago. The rest of the pages were blank, though the impression of writing remained faintly visible on one of them, as if someone had pressed hard with a pen and then torn out the page. She closed the book quickly, her palms damp. Gold, she whispered to herself. What gold? The creak of footsteps outside made her freeze. Elijah looked up, wide-eyed. Jordan crossed the cabin and peered through the grimy window, but saw only the shimmer of sunlight on the water. Probably just another fisherman on the dock, she told herself. Still, she locked the cabin door before returning to the table. For the next few hours, she explored every corner of the yacht. She found 3 cabins, one clearly lived in, the others full of storage. There were trunks of clothing, tools, boxes of yellowed newspapers, and stacks of old photographs. In one small compartment near the engine room, she found several sealed cans of fuel and a rusted metal box. Inside the box was a set of black and white photographs wrapped in oilcloth. She sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through them. Most were grainy, taken decades ago, men in naval uniforms standing beside military trucks, jungles in the background, a coastal village with smoke rising in the distance. In one photo, her grandfather stood with a group of soldiers, a radio slung over his shoulder, his face half hidden by a cap. Written on the back in faded ink were the words Bluefields 1979. That year tugged at something in her memory. She had read about the Sandinista revolution once, about coups and American involvement, about secret funding and missing resources. But what would her grandfather, a retired sailor from South Carolina, have to do with any of that? Elijah tugged at her sleeve. Mom, can we go now? It smells funny. Soon, baby, she said absently, still staring at the photo. There was something about his expression, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his mouth set in grim determination, that told her this man had carried more than one secret. She put the photos back carefully, closing the lid. When she stood, her knees cracked. She realized then that the cabin's interior dimensions didn't quite match the yacht's outer structure. The portside wall seemed narrower than it should be. Jordan ran her hand along the paneling, tapping lightly. The sound changed. Solid, hollow. She frowned and pressed harder. One section flexed slightly under her palm. It felt like a false wall. Elijah, she said quietly, go wait outside, okay? Why? Just for a minute. He hesitated but obeyed, stepping back out onto the deck. She waited until she heard the door close, then knelt beside the wall, tracing the seams with her fingertips. There was no visible latch or hinge, only a faint line along the wood grain. She found a screwdriver among the tools and used it to pry gently at the edge. The panel resisted at first, then gave a little. Beneath it was a narrow gap, too dark to see into. She shone her phone's flashlight inside. Something gleamed faintly in the beam, metallic, rectangular. A box. Her heartbeat quickened. She worked the screwdriver around the edges until the panel loosened enough to remove completely. Behind it lay a cavity that ran nearly the length of the cabin. Inside were several wrapped bundles, each the size of a large book, coated in grime and canvas. Jordan pulled one out carefully. It was heavier than she expected. Her fingers trembled as she peeled back the layers of fabric. Beneath the cloth was a hard case, and when she pried it open, a dull yellow glint met her eyes. Gold. Not jewelry or coins, but solid bars stamped with numbers and an emblem she didn't recognize. Banco Central de Nicaragua. Her breath caught. There were at least a dozen more packages behind it. She counted quickly, though her hands shook too much to be precise. The weight of what she'd found pressed down on her chest, suffocating in its enormity. She rewrapped the bar, slid it back into its hiding place, and replaced the panel. Her palms were slick with sweat, her pulse racing. She went out onto the deck, blinking against the brightness of the sun. Elijah sat on the steps, swinging his legs and humming softly. "Ready to go?" he asked. She forced her voice steady. "Yeah, let's get lunch." As they walked back up the dock, she felt eyes on her again. The same man she'd noticed the day before, thin, tanned, wearing a baseball cap, was standing on a neighboring yacht, pretending to coil a rope. His gaze flicked toward her for a split second before turning away. Jordan tightened her grip on her son's hand. Her instincts screamed that whatever her grandfather had hidden wasn't just old treasure, it was something people were still willing to kill for. Back at the motel, she locked the door and pulled the curtains shut. Elijah was busy drawing on the bedspread with his crayons, oblivious to the storm brewing in his mother's mind. She opened her laptop again and began to search. It didn't take long to find it. In 1979, during the fall of the Somoza regime in Nicaragua, the country's national gold reserves, worth nearly $20 million at the time, had vanished. Officially, the gold had been moved for safekeeping, but no record of its arrival at any bank ever appeared. Rumors tied its disappearance to the CIA, to local generals, to revolutionaries. Some said the gold had been used to fund covert operations throughout Central America. Others believed it had been smuggled to the United States. Her grandfather had been in Bluefields that same year. Jordan sat back, her hands trembling over the keyboard. The pieces began to form a shape she didn't want to recognize. What if her grandfather hadn't just found the gold? What if he'd taken it to keep it out of the wrong hands? What if he'd lived his whole life hiding not from poverty, but from the people who wanted it back? The knock at the door made her flinch so hard she nearly dropped the laptop. Elijah looked up, startled. "Stay here," she whispered. She approached the door slowly, peeking through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood outside, clean cut, his smile almost too perfect. He held a folder under one arm. "Ms. Miller?" he called, his tone polite but insistent. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is David Chen. I represent a client who's very interested in purchasing your yacht." Jordan didn't open the door. "How did you know I had a yacht?" He chuckled lightly. "Word travels fast in places like this. My client collects classic vessels. He's prepared to offer you $50,000 cash today." Her heart pounded. $50,000 for that rusted wreck? She glanced toward the duffel bag where she'd hidden the gold bars she'd taken. They couldn't possibly know, could they? "I'm not selling," she said through the door. "Think about it," Chen replied. His voice softened, almost friendly. "Boats like that are money pits. My client's offer won't last long." When he finally left, Jordan sank onto the edge of the bed. Elijah climbed beside her, frowning. "Who was that?" "No one, baby," she said, wrapping an arm around him. "Just someone who wants to buy old junk." But she knew better. The timing was too perfect. Someone knew what was hidden inside the Mariah Dawn. That night, sleep refused to come. Every creak of the motel pipes, every car that passed outside made her sit up, heart hammering. She checked on Elijah twice, watching him breathe in the dim light. Somewhere, far beyond the quiet of the motel, pieces were moving. The gold wasn't just history, it was unfinished business. As dawn began to break again, Jordan stood by the window, watching the first light spill across the parking lot. The world looked ordinary, unchanged, but inside her something had shifted. She had inherited more than a rotting yacht. She had inherited a secret, and secrets, she was starting to understand, never stayed buried for long. The motel room felt smaller the next morning, as if the walls had crept closer during the night. Jordan woke before Elijah, the pale Florida sunlight pushing through a slit in the curtain. Her body was tired, but her mind was wired. Every sound made her tense. Every creak of the building, a potential threat. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same question circling in her thoughts. How many people knew about the gold? And who exactly were they? She remembered the man from the neighboring yacht, the way he'd looked away too quickly when she caught his gaze. She remembered David Chen's perfect smile, his too easy offer, the polished shoes that didn't belong to anyone who spent time around marinas. These weren't random coincidences. The moment she had opened that hidden compartment on the Mariah Dawn, something had shifted in the air around her. It was as though she'd stepped into a story that had been waiting 50 years for its next chapter. Elijah stirred, his curls sticking out in every direction. "Morning," he mumbled. Morning, baby, she said softly. You hungry? He nodded, rubbing his eyes. She poured cereal into 2 plastic bowls from the box she'd picked up the night before. It wasn't much, but Elijah ate happily, humming to himself. Jordan forced herself to smile, but her thoughts were miles away. She needed to talk to someone who had known her grandfather, someone who could explain why he'd lived his last years hiding on a broken yacht. The harbor master had mentioned a man named Luis Mora, someone who'd worked with her grandfather years ago. If he was still alive, he might hold answers. After breakfast, she called the marina office. The same gravelly voice answered. This is Pelican Bay Marina. This is Jordan Miller, she said. You mentioned yesterday that my grandfather had a friend named Luis Mora. Do you know where I could find him? A pause. Mora? Sure, old Luis is still around. Lives about 10 minutes up the road by the shrimp docks. Little blue house with a tin roof. Can't miss it. Thank you, she said, and hung up before he could ask questions. She told Elijah they were going to meet someone who had known his great-grandfather. He didn't look thrilled, but he followed without complaint. They drove through the narrow streets lined with palms and pastel houses until they reached the docks. The air smelled of salt and diesel and the faint sweetness of shrimp shells baking in the sun. A small blue house sat at the edge of the pier, paint peeling, a rocking chair swaying gently on the porch, though no one sat there. Jordan knocked on the screen door. For a moment there was silence. Then slow footsteps approached, and an elderly man appeared, a wiry figure with sun-darkened skin, white hair pulled into a short ponytail, and eyes as sharp as glass. Can I help you? He asked, his voice low but strong. I'm Jordan Miller, she said quickly. My grandfather was James Miller. The harbor master said you knew him. At the mention of the name, something flickered in the man's eyes. He pushed the screen door open. Come in. The interior of the house was cluttered but clean, filled with the smell of coffee and the faint tang of oil. The walls were covered with old photographs of ships, men in uniform, and a few newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Luis motioned for her to sit. Elijah stayed close, looking around with wide eyes. James Miller, Luis said, lowering himself into a chair across from her. Haven't heard that name spoken in years. He was my grandfather, Jordan said. He passed recently. I inherited his yacht. Luis nodded slowly. The Mariah Dawn. He loved that boat more than he loved himself. I figured he'd die aboard her. He did, she said softly. I found some things there. His journals, some photographs, and something hidden. Luis's eyes narrowed. Hidden? She hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretending. Gold, a lot of it. Bars stamped with a foreign seal. The old man didn't look surprised. Instead, he leaned back, letting out a long sigh. So you found it at last. You knew about it. I helped him hide it. The words hit her like a wave. Why? What is it? Where did it come from? Luis poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the counter and took a sip before answering. Your grandfather wasn't just a sailor. He was part of something bigger. In the 70s, the U.S. was involved in operations down in Central America. Dirty work nobody wanted to talk about. James was a radio man on a supply vessel that made deliveries to the Nicaraguan coast. Officially, they were humanitarian shipments. In reality, guns, ammo, and money, lots of it. When the regime fell, chaos followed. The national treasury vanished gold, all of it. Some of it ended up on his ship. Jordan's stomach turned. You're saying he stole it? Luis shook his head. He saved it. He found out where the gold was going, straight into the pockets of politicians and warlords. He took it before they could, said it didn't belong to killers. He planned to give it back someday, when it could do some good. But that day never came. The people he crossed, they don't forgive. He went into hiding, changed his name, moved from port to port. I helped him patch the Mariah more times than I can count. He said one day someone pure would finish what he couldn't. Jordan didn't know whether to feel anger, awe, or fear. Pure, she repeated. He thought I'd, what? Fix his mess? I'm just trying to pay rent. Luis's expression softened. Sometimes we don't get to choose the storms we sail into, Nina. They find us. Elijah tugged at her sleeve. Mom, what's he talking about? Jordan smiled faintly. Grown-up stuff, baby. Luis stood and walked to a small cabinet. He opened it and pulled out a faded envelope, sealed with tape so old it had turned yellow. He left this with me. Told me to give it to whoever came looking for the truth. I suppose that's you. She took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were several folded sheets of paper, brittle and stained. The writing was her grandfather's, careful and deliberate. The first page was a letter. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I couldn't bring myself to destroy what I took, not after what I learned. This gold was never meant for kings or generals. It was stolen from the poor twice, first by tyrants, then by those who pretended to be their saviors. If someone ever finds it, I pray they'll have the courage to finish what I couldn't. Jordan's throat tightened. At the bottom of the letter was a name, Eduardo Varela. It sounded familiar, though she couldn't place it. Luis saw her expression. Eduardo was his commanding officer, a Panamanian. He tried to stop the theft before it happened. They blamed him for it instead, executed him as a traitor. So my grandfather ran to save what was left, she murmured. Luis nodded, and lived like a ghost to protect it. But the men behind that theft, they built empires from the blood money. They still have power. If they know you found the gold, they'll come. The words settled heavily in the air. Jordan folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. When they left Luis's house, the afternoon had turned sweltering. Elijah was quiet, watching pelicans dive into the water. Jordan felt the weight of the envelope in her purse like an anchor. Back at the motel, she spread the papers on the bed, reading through every line. The logs included coordinates, names, coded messages, details of every shipment her grandfather had ever made. It was clear he'd been documenting everything, maybe for the day when the truth could finally be told. But now the truth was dangerous. Someone already knew about the gold. The knock from David Chen wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. She answered cautiously. Hello? Ms. Miller, came Chen's smooth voice. I trust you're settling in. I hope you've reconsidered my client's offer. No, she said flatly, and don't call this number again. Be careful, Ms. Miller, he replied, his tone losing its warmth. That yacht of yours carries a heavy history. Some inheritances are better left buried. The line went dead. Jordan lowered the phone slowly, her pulse racing. She went to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Across the parking lot, a black sedan idled near the exit, its tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Fear clawed up her throat, but beneath it was something stronger, a stubborn resolve that reminded her of the way her grandfather's eyes had looked in those old photographs. If these people thought they could scare her into silence, they were wrong. That night she lay awake for hours, listening to the rhythm of Elijah's breathing beside her. Every time headlights swept across the curtains, her heart leapt. But as the hours passed and no knock came, her fear slowly hardened into determination. By morning, she knew what she had to do. She couldn't run. There was nowhere safe enough. She couldn't sell the yacht or the gold. That would only feed the same corruption her grandfather had fought to stop. The only way out was through. She needed help, someone who could expose what this was, someone who could shine light on the darkness before it swallowed her. There was a journalist she'd read about once, a woman named Camille Brooks, who had uncovered corruption in Miami's city council and lived to tell the tale. If anyone could handle a story like this, it was her. Jordan found Camille's contact information online and drafted an email that she rewrote a dozen times before finally sending. My name is Jordan Miller. I think I've uncovered something that's been hidden for decades, something people are willing to kill for. Please call me. It's about stolen gold, my grandfather, and a yacht called the Mariah Dawn. She hesitated before pressing send, but once she did, a strange calm settled over her. For the first time since that phone call from the lawyer, she felt like she was doing something her grandfather might have approved of. Elijah stirred as the first light of dawn crept into the room. She brushed a hand through his curls and whispered, We're going to be okay, baby, I promise. Outside, the black sedan was gone. The marina lay still beneath the rising sun, quiet and watchful. Somewhere out there, she knew, the men who didn't forget were already moving again, following the scent of what they believed was theirs. But the Mariah Dawn was more than a treasure chest. It was a witness, and Jordan Miller, whether she was ready or not, was the only one left to tell its story. The following day dawned bright and too still, the kind of deceptive calm that feels like the world holding its breath before a storm. Jordan had not slept much. Every sound during the night, the groan of the motel pipes, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway, had sounded like footsteps or the closing of a car door. Her nerves were stretched thin, her body locked in the restless alertness of someone who knew she was being watched. But despite the exhaustion that clung to her, she woke with a decision firm in her chest. If the truth was dangerous, then hiding from it would not make her safe. The only thing that could was to expose it. After getting Elijah ready for breakfast, she checked her phone again. No messages from Camille Brooks. For a moment, she feared the journalist had ignored her email. But as she poured cereal into a bowl, her phone buzzed. A new number, no name. "This is Jordan Miller," she answered cautiously. "Jordan, this is Camille Brooks," came a warm, confident voice on the other end. "I got your message late last night. I have to admit, it sounded unbelievable gold. Conspiracies, missing national reserves. But then I looked up your grandfather's name and the Mariah Dawn. It's an interesting trail. Are you somewhere safe?" Jordan glanced at Elijah. "Safe enough for now. I can be in Key West by noon. Meet me somewhere public, somewhere you'll feel comfortable." They agreed on a small cafe overlooking the marina, a bright place with umbrellas and tourists, perfect for a meeting where being seen was protection. Jordan spent the next few hours pacing the motel room, rehearsing what to say. When the time came, she left Elijah with the cartoon channel and strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. The cafe was half full when she arrived. Sunlight glinted off the ocean through the glass windows. She recognized Camille immediately from the photos she'd seen online. Early 40s, brown skin, close-cropped hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple linen shirt and jeans, but there was an authority in the way she sat, someone who had stood in front of threats before and refused to move. "Ms. Miller," Camille said as Jordan approached. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Jordan did, wrapping her hands around the cool glass of water the waiter placed in front of her. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me. Let's say I'm cautiously intrigued. I've heard crazier stories that turned out to be true. Tell me everything from the beginning." Jordan took a deep breath and began. She told Camille about the call from the lawyer, about finding the yacht, about the maps and journals, and finally about the hidden compartment and the gold stamped with the seal of Nicaragua. She left nothing out, not even the visit from David Shen and the black sedan that followed them. Camille listened in silence, her expression unreadable, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather-bound notebook. When Jordan finished, the journalist leaned back, tapping her pen against the page. "That's one hell of a story," she said finally. "If it's true, and I'm not saying I doubt you, it could blow open something big. You're talking about stolen government reserves, Cold War operations, decades of cover-ups. Do you still have the gold?" "Some," Jordan admitted. "I took one bar with me for proof. The rest is still on the yacht." "I'd like to see it," Camille said. Jordan hesitated. "I don't want to put you in danger." Camille gave a small, knowing smile. "Ms. Miller, danger's part of my job. If people are still protecting this secret, the only way to make you safe is to drag it into the light. Let's go." They drove together to the marina, the air thick with the scent of seaweed and gasoline. When they reached the Mariah Dawn, Camille whistled softly. "She's beautiful in her own way," she said, running her hand along the hull. "You can tell she's been through things." Jordan led her aboard and unlocked the cabin. Camille crouched beside the hidden panel while Jordan pried it open again. When she pulled out the canvas-wrapped package and revealed the gold bar, the reporter's eyes widened. "Well," she said quietly, "you weren't exaggerating." She examined the markings, snapping photos with her phone. "Banco Central de Nicaragua," she murmured. "And these serial numbers, they're consistent with the missing reserves reported in 1979. This could be the biggest financial cover-up since Iran-Contra." Jordan frowned. "What happens now?" "I'll verify the documentation and cross-reference the serials with existing archives. Once we publish, this won't be a mystery anymore. It'll be a scandal, but we have to be careful." Whoever's still trying to suppress this won't hesitate to act once they know you've gone to the press. As they were packing up, Camille's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression tightening. Someone's already trying to track me. My sources in Miami just flagged a query on my credentials. That's fast too fast. Jordan's stomach turned cold. They know? Maybe not exactly what we're doing, but they know something's moving. They left the yacht and went to a quiet bar near the edge of town, where Camille opened her laptop and began connecting to a secured network. She showed Jordan a series of files, declassified reports, financial statements, CIA memos. "See this?" she said, pointing at a line of text. In 1979, a U.S. contractor named Victor Larson helped coordinate the movement of funds through Panama and Honduras. Then he disappeared. No one's seen him since the 80s. Jordan froze. "Larson? That's the man who came to me. He offered to buy the yacht." Camille's eyes widened. "Then he's not dead. He's been watching all along." They stared at each other, the realization hitting both at once. Victor wasn't just an old operative, he was still active, still protecting the secret her grandfather had risked everything to keep hidden. That night, Jordan returned to the motel to find the door slightly ajar. Her heart stopped. She rushed inside. Elijah was fine, sitting on the bed with his headphones on, oblivious to the world. But the place had been searched. Her clothes were thrown aside, drawers open. The envelope with her grandfather's letter was gone. She called Camille immediately. "They've been here," she said, her voice shaking. "They took the letter." "Pack what you can and come to me," Camille ordered. "I've got a safe place near Marathon Key. We'll regroup there." Jordan gathered her things, moving fast. Elijah sensed the tension and clung to her arm. "Mom, are we in trouble?" She kissed his forehead. "No, baby. We're just going somewhere safer." They met Camille an hour later at a gas station off Highway 1. The journalist's car was an old silver Jeep, its windows tinted. She loaded their bags into the back and handed Jordan a burner phone. "If anything happens, call me on this. Don't use your own number." The drive to Marathon was long and quiet. Elijah fell asleep in the back seat while Jordan and Camille spoke in low voices about what came next. Camille planned to release an exposé, but only after verifying every detail. She needed evidence, documents, recordings, something that couldn't be dismissed as rumor. When they arrived at the small beach house Camille used as a temporary base, Jordan felt a brief wave of relief. The place was isolated, surrounded by mangroves. The journalist set up her laptop at the kitchen table and began uploading the photos and files. "We'll need a recorded confession," she said, "something from Larson or his associates. Once they talk, the whole network unravels." "How do we make him talk?" Jordan asked. Camille smiled grimly. "By making him believe you're willing to deal." The plan was risky. Jordan would contact Larson and pretend she was ready to sell the gold, arranging a meeting aboard the Mariah Dawn. Camille would hide microphones on the yacht, record everything, and capture Larson admitting to the original theft and decades of corruption. The next day, Jordan called Larson using the burner phone. "I've reconsidered," she told him, "but I want to meet in person. On the yacht, tomorrow night." He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." The following evening, the marina was quiet. Camille set up the hidden recorders beneath the cabin table and inside a toolbox near the hatch. Jordan's hands shook as she checked her reflection in the porthole. Elijah was safe with one of Camille's friends up the coast. That was the only reason she could go through with this. When Larson arrived, the air around him seemed to change. He was older than she remembered, his once blonde hair gone gray, his tan skin leathery, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Two men accompanied him, silent and watchful. "You made the right choice, Ms. Miller," he said smoothly, stepping aboard. "Where's the cargo?" "In the hold," she lied, motioning toward the stairs. "But before we talk about price, I need to know the truth. Why was it hidden? Why did my grandfather die alone guarding it?" Larson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your grandfather was a good man, but naive. He didn't understand that history is written by the survivors, that gold funded stability in a region on the brink of collapse. He tried to play hero, but heroes die poor." Jordan held her breath as the hidden microphones caught every word. Camille's car was parked nearby, listening through the receiver. Larson stepped closer. "You could have been rich, Ms. Miller, but instead you involved the press. That was foolish." Before she could respond, one of his men moved suddenly, grabbing her arm. She struggled, but Larson raised a hand, stopping him. No need for violence. Not yet. Where's the rest of it? Jordan met his gaze. Gone. And soon everyone will know what you did. He stared at her, realization dawning. Then his smile vanished. You recorded this? At that exact moment, sirens wailed in the distance. Camille had called in her backup, a team of local police and a federal contact who owed her favors. Larson's men bolted, but one was caught near the dock. Larson tried to run, disappearing into the maze of boats and warehouses. The police shouted orders. Lights flashed against the water. Jordan stood frozen, her heart hammering, until Camille reached her, breathless but smiling. We got him on tape, she said. Every word. It's enough. For the first time in days, Jordan felt the tightness in her chest ease. She looked out at the Maria Dawn, still rocking gently in her berth, the lights from the patrol boats painting her hull in shifting blue and red. The yacht that had once been her grandfather's burden had now become their witness. Later, back at the beach house, Camille began uploading the recordings and drafts to multiple servers, ensuring that even if someone tried to stop them, the story would survive. They can't silence the truth now, she said quietly. Jordan watched the screen where the first headline began to form. The Maria Conspiracy, How Stolen Gold and Forgotten Wars Built Empires in the Shadows. She exhaled slowly, feeling both lighter and older. She had done what her grandfather couldn't. But as she looked out the window toward the dark horizon, she knew this wasn't the end. The men who had built their power on blood and secrecy would not surrender quietly. Still, for tonight, the truth had a voice, and it spoke through her. The morning after the raid broke gray and quiet over the Keys, as if the world itself needed a moment to absorb what had happened. The Maria Dawn sat motionless in her berth, her paint peeling but her hull proud, as though the old yacht had known all along that she would one day bear witness to history. Jordan watched from the dock with tired eyes, her arms wrapped around herself against the early chill. The night's adrenaline had faded, leaving only exhaustion and an ache deep in her bones. She hadn't slept at all, and yet she couldn't bring herself to leave. This place, for all its ghosts and dangers, had become a part of her. The marina was alive with quiet chaos. Police and federal agents moved between boats, taking statements, collecting evidence. Camille stood near one of the patrol cars, her sharp voice rising above the hum as she argued with an officer about custody of the recordings. When she saw Jordan, she broke away and came to her, her expression a mixture of relief and steel. It's over for now, Camille said, her voice low. Larson's in custody. He didn't make it far. They found him hiding in a warehouse a few miles north. Jordan let out a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. And the others? One dead in the chase, the other in interrogation already talking. You did it, Jordan. You handed them the truth on a platter. Jordan looked out at the boat again. My grandfather did it. I just followed his trail. Camille gave a small, approving nod. You did more than follow it. You finished it. The sun began to climb higher, glinting off the water in long streaks of gold that reminded Jordan too much of the bars still hidden deep within the yacht. The police had taken some as evidence, but there was more she hadn't told them about the packages further down in the hidden compartment, the ones she'd left untouched. That secret still sat heavy in her mind. Will they return the gold? She asked quietly. Camille hesitated. Maybe some of it. Bureaucracies move slow, and money has a way of vanishing between the cracks. But your story will make it harder for them to bury this again. The whole world's going to know. Jordan watched a small flock of pelicans dive into the bay, their wings cutting the air like knives. I just don't want it to happen again, she said. Not to anyone. Camille put a hand on her shoulder. Then don't disappear. People like me can expose the truth, but people like you make others believe in it. The public needs to see who you are. You're not just a source, you're a voice. Jordan wasn't sure she wanted to be anyone's voice. She'd spent most of her life invisible, and invisibility had felt safer. But as she thought of her grandfather's journals, his long years of exile and silence, she realized that hiding had never saved him. Truth might not protect her either, but at least it would matter. By the time the reporters arrived, the sun was high, and the marina shimmered in its glare. Word had spread fast. stolen Nicaraguan gold, Cold War corruption, a mysterious woman inheriting a ghost ship. Microphones and cameras swarmed the docks, and Jordan found herself the unwilling center of attention. She stood beside Camille, answering what questions she could, deflecting what she couldn't. "Did you know about your grandfather's past before inheriting the yacht?" one reporter asked. "No," she said honestly. "I knew almost nothing about him, but I know now he wasn't the villain history painted him to be." "What will you do with the gold?" another shouted. Jordan glanced at Camille, who gave her a subtle nod to speak freely. "It doesn't belong to me," she said. "It never did. It belongs to the people it was stolen from." Her voice carried over the murmuring crowd, and for a moment there was silence, except for the slap of waves against the dock. Later, when the cameras left and the police tape fluttered in the breeze, Jordan walked through the yacht one last time. The cabin still smelled faintly of salt and rust, the air thick with memories. She ran her hand over the chart table where she'd first found her grandfather's notes. There were stains there now, coffee, sweat, maybe tears, but she didn't clean them. They were part of the story. She found another of his journals tucked under the bunk, one she hadn't seen before. The pages were brittle, written in the same neat hand. The last entry was dated just weeks before his death. "I no longer fear the men who might come for me. What I fear is the silence. The sea forgets nothing, but men do. If anyone ever finds this, know that I never wanted gold. I wanted memory. I wanted to prove that truth, like the tide, always returns." She closed the book and pressed it against her chest. "I found you, Grandpa," she whispered, "and I won't let them forget." 2 days later, the story broke worldwide. Newspapers, online headlines, television specials, all bearing variations of the same phrase. The Mariah conspiracy, photos of the yacht filled screens across the country, her corroded hull gleaming under the Florida sun like a relic risen from history's depths. Names of politicians, contractors, and companies linked to the decades-old scandal appeared in bold. There were protests, investigations, denials, and resignations. Jordan and Elijah were taken into protective custody for a time, housed in a safe location until the media frenzy calmed. Camille visited daily, bringing updates and reassurance. "You've changed more than you realize," she told her one evening as they sat by the window, watching Elijah play with a toy plane on the floor. "You've given people something to believe in, a reminder that justice can come from the most unexpected places." "I didn't set out to be anyone's reminder," Jordan said. "I just wanted to understand why my grandfather left me that boat." "And now you do," Camille said. "He left it to the one person who wouldn't run from the truth." When they were finally free to return to their lives, Jordan knew she couldn't go back to Charleston. The old apartment, the diner job, the endless struggle. It all felt like a different lifetime. She found work at a small boat repair yard in Savannah, where the sea breeze carried the same briny smell as Key West, but softer, calmer. She liked the rhythm of the work, the clink of tools, the hum of engines, the quiet satisfaction of fixing something broken. Elijah thrived there too. He went to a small school near the marina, spent afternoons helping her clean boats, and asked questions about his great-grandfather that she could finally answer. They lived simply, but for the first time in years, there was peace. Every so often, Camille called with updates. The recovered gold under international supervision had been divided among aid programs and Nicaragua funds for schools, hospitals, and historical preservation. Some of the money even went to create a museum exhibit dedicated to the events, the Mariah Dawn, Hope at Sea. A year later, Jordan received an invitation to the exhibit's opening in Panama City. The letter was printed on heavy paper, the seal of the cultural ministry embossed at the top. It included her travel arrangements and a note in Camille's handwriting. "You should see what they've built. He deserves it. So do you." Jordan almost said no. She had grown wary of attention, and the idea of standing under bright lights while people whispered her name felt suffocating. But Elijah's excitement changed her mind. "We have to go, Mom," he said. "It's about Grandpa. We should be there." So they went. The museum was beautiful, a blend of glass and stone overlooking the ocean. The exhibit took up an entire hall. Photographs of the gold bars, declassified documents, a replica of the Mariah Dawn's cabin, and at its center, a simple plaque bearing the names of those who had lost their lives protecting or seeking the truth. Among them was Captain James W. Miller, sailor, father, witness. Jordan stood before it for a long time, her vision blurring. The years of secrecy and silence that had surrounded her family had been stripped away, replaced with recognition, understanding, and a quiet kind of grace. Elijah slipped his hand into hers. "He's a hero," he said softly. She nodded. "He is." And so was everyone who refused to forget. After the ceremony, Camille joined them by the balcony overlooking the sea. The evening light turned the waves copper and rose. "It's done," Camille said. "The story's closed." Jordan smiled faintly. "Stories like this never really close. The sea keeps them alive." Camille raised an eyebrow. "You sound like a writer. Maybe you should tell your own version someday." "Maybe," Jordan said, glancing at Elijah. "But for now, I'm just going to live it." They stood in silence, watching the sun sink into the horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond the line where sky met water, the real Mariah Dawn still floated. The Panamanian government had restored her, not to erase her scars, but to preserve them. She was now part of the museum collection, moored at the pier below, a symbol of truth reclaimed from the depths. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the night grew quiet, Jordan and Elijah walked down to the pier to see the yacht. Lights from the harbor shimmered on her polished surface. The name Mariah Dawn gleamed in fresh paint across the stern, but beneath it, faintly visible through the new layer, were the weathered letters of her grandfather's original hand. Jordan reached out, touching the metal. The chill of it spread through her fingertips, grounding her. She closed her eyes and let the sounds of the water fill her, the whisper of the tide, the creak of ropes, the faint call of distant gulls. "This was his home," Elijah said. "It's kind of ours now, isn't it?" She smiled, her heart swelling with something that felt like peace. "In a way, yes. It gave us back who we were." They stood together until the museum lights dimmed and the stars came out. For the first time in a long time, the darkness didn't feel threatening. It felt vast and alive, full of possibility. When they finally turned to go, Jordan looked back one last time at the yacht gleaming under the moonlight. Some inheritances come with weight, she thought, some with danger, but the rarest kind come with truth, and truth, once brought to the surface, can never drown again. She took Elijah's hand, and together they walked toward the quiet street, their footsteps fading into the rhythm of the sea behind them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. Check out my other videos for more thrilling stories just like this one. And if you liked it, share it with your friends. Let's keep the adventure going together.